Hi, this is Robin. Welcome back. This video is titled Visual Storytelling in Photoshop. One photo, three stories. And this will be part one on art concepts. So this is the first in a four-part series about how to take one photograph and tell three different stories with it using Photoshop. Now, when I think of most Photoshop tutorials, I think they focus on the latest features or simply fixing photos. But I said to myself, well, what if the image isn't broken? What if the real challenge is changing the story that the image tells? So in this series of four videos, I'm taking one photo, this starting stock photo right here, and I am transforming it into three completely different emotional narratives: loneliness or sadness, happiness or joy, and paranoia or fear. This first video, I'll look at the artistic principles behind those transformations. And then in the next three videos, I'll show you exactly how I built each visual story in Photoshop. And we'll go step by step, like in my typical videos. I'll feature different workflows and tools for each of these examples, so you do get some breadth of different capabilities that you can use in creating visual stories. Now, as you can see, my sample image is a portrait. You can use any image you like for visual storytelling. The analysis and the art principles that I'll share and the Photoshop tools that I'll demo in subsequent videos will work the same across different photographic genres. So here is my big tip. Before even touching Photoshop, I think about five things. So one is what is the emotional anchor? In other words, the mood or the feeling that I want to convey. Two is what colors support that mood or story that I want to convey. Three, how should the light behave? Four, where should the viewer's eyes go in the scene? And five, what subtle details will reinforce the story? So let's take a look here at those five questions and try to apply them to a real image to see how it works. So I'm going to pause for just a moment and just focus in on my starting photo. Okay, so this is my starting image. It is an Unsplash stock photo, and the maker is Brad Switzer. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. The reason I chose this is I think it's narratively neutral. To me, her expression is ambiguous. Her pose is somewhat ambiguous. There is a nice mix of warm and cool colors. So the warms tend to be in here and some of the bricks. And then the cooler colors are these grays that are in here as well. And then you can probably see there's like a greenish tint to the glass. So we get the cool colors there that we can work with. There are window panes and these divided spaces. There's some reflections. There's grime on the window. There's some negative space. And that, so all of those things together, I think, provide some strong visual elements that we can work with. Now, I mean, I think looking at this image, we don't really know if she's lonely, hopeful, hiding from someone, or waiting from someone. I mean, it's a very lovely image, but that uncertainty makes it ideal as a storytelling canvas to take an image and make it more than just a pretty picture. Now, if we manipulate those elements through color harmony, light shaping, composition, and micro expression, as I'm calling it. So in other words, very subtle changes to her facial expressions. We can craft or sculpt visual stories from base images. So I'd say, like, watch and see how the meaning changes, even though the photograph itself barely changes. Let me shrink this starting image down and put the first story image up, and we can go through it. So this is story number 1 that I created on sadness and loneliness. That was my goal there. And the goal, in addition, was to make this environment feel cold, heavy, and isolating. So I use 4 art principles as the framework to achieve that. Now, let me just, in this first one, walk through it, and then I'll do a more abbreviated version for the other 2 stories. So the first principle is color harmony. So as you can see, I shifted to an overall cool color temperature. I stripped away any of the warm amber tones from the original image and then flooded this entire scene with more deep, desaturated blues and cyans. When I think about blue, I think it signifies or it symbolizes coldness, emotional distance, grief. So I've also, by doing this, made her skin look drained of its original warm color. It implies she's emotionally drained. It adds a sense of sadness, which is the intent of this story for me. So besides color harmony, the next thing I would look at as an artistic principle is either light quality or lighting direction. So again, I pulled down the overall exposure to create more of a low-key, dim atmosphere. The light hitting her face now feels more like it's fading into early twilight or a blue hour. And see, as the window is darker, it starts to dominate the frame and essentially trap her behind a wall of cold shadows and loneliness or sadness. Now, I said another area to look at as an artistic principle was micro expressions, and meaning just subtle changes. You don't want to go totally rechanging somebody's face. But if we look at her face, her eyes now have more darkness to them. They're heavier. She has a little bit of more of a defeated quality. It's a quiet sorrow or sadness. It's not a caricature of sadness. Okay? Compositionally, I've kept the same wide framing as the original, but I wanted to lean into that extended, empty, negative space in here, okay, on the left from the original image. But now the left side of the frame is darker. It feels more vacant. It emphasizes physical separation from the world outside. In this case, this window frame is acting more like a literal psychological barrier between her and whatever is outside of her apartment or her loft. If we combine these 4 elements, the image no longer looks like a standard portrait. To me, it starts looking more like a film still, which was my goal. I'm trying to capture a moment of profound isolation, sadness, or loneliness. So that's the analysis of the approach to this image. Let me pause and look at the next story. This is story number 2. And again, now here I'm going for more of a story about happiness, joy, or anticipation. So because that's what I wanted to achieve, my goal was to make the environment feel optimistic and full of life. So you'll notice if you look at this, we're using the same 4 storytelling tools that I just mentioned a moment ago for the previous story, but I'm pointing them in a completely different direction. So I've added more warmer colors, this sort of gentle glow up here at the upper right that bleeds over and across the entire window. And when we look at this apartment or loft, it's no longer a prison or, a prison for her. She's not a prisoner who's stuck alone there. In fact, I think now the negative space in her apartment becomes more of a possibility of a space that can be shared. So we've also done a slight adjustment to her face with those micro expressions, and she has a more hopeful, happy expression on her face. So that was the modifications that I did and the principles that I used to make visual story number 2. Let me pause this for the last time and we'll look at story number 3. All right, this is story number 3 and the final story, and I've created this meant to show fear, tension, or paranoia. Now, the goal in what I want to achieve in the look here was to make this environment feel deeply unsettling, sort of threatening, definitely claustrophobic. So for this story, I used Photoshop tools to make it look more like a still from a psychological thriller. I shifted, as you can see, the color palette into more desaturated, sickly, muddy, sort of institutional tones. These are not colors of green from nature. This is more institutional. My intent was to strip away all sense of comfort and to send visual clues that something is wrong here. I have compressed the dynamic range. I added contrast to her, and I've heavily darkened the shadows to make them more threatening and to make her space feel more claustrophobic, as if it is closing in on her from all sides here. Okay. I also manipulated her expression subtly to make it look more fearful, hyper-focused, and for the elements of her body, including even her knuckles, to look more tense in reaction to this environment. So those are the ways that we can use the principles to adjust the starting image to create different stories. So 1 photo, 3 stories. Let me pause one last time and bring up all 3 again. When you think about it, it's pretty incredible that the same base photo can speak to 3 completely different emotional visual stories based on how we choose to use Photoshop tools. We didn't change her pose. We did not composite a single new thing into the frame. We simply reshaped color, composition, the direction or quality of light, and micro expressions to change emotional meaning in the scene. So in this video, we focused on the why behind creative choices that I make to develop these types of looks or visual stories. In the next video, we'll start with this same unretouched original image and we'll build the loneliness story from scratch. Okay. So what might surprise you is how few changes we actually have to make before viewers begin reading a completely different story into the scene. See you there.